New criticism. New criticism is another approach, methodology that developed around about 1950s. Question is, what is the reason for the development of a new concept of a new criticism? New criticism developed as a reaction to the older philological and literary history and meaning of the individual words and their relation to foreign and ancient languages, comparative sources, and the biographical circumstances of the author. These approaches, that is, languages, sources, biographical concepts, it was felt tended to distract from the text and meaning of a poem and entirely neglecting its authentic qualities in favor of teaching about external factors, that is, giving less importance to the text and more importance to the biographical details of the writer, the social context under which the text was created, and other factors related to the writing of the text. On the other hand, the literary appreciation school, which limited itself to pointing out the beauties and morally elevating qualities of the text, was disparaged. Means giving importance to the beauty of the text, the beauty of creation, was ridiculed and laughed at by the new critics as too subjective and emotional, condemning this as a version of romanticism. These new critics aimed for newer systematic and objective method. Then question comes, what is new criticism? New criticism, in simple terms, is a critical movement that propagated the idea or the principle of art for art's sake. It focused on the close reading of the text, ignoring the biographical details of the author, who the reader is, and under what social context the text was created. Now the question comes, when actually this new criticism began? We know what is the reason. New criticism was a formalist movement in literary theory that dominated American literary criticism in the middle decades of 20th century. As we have said, it emphasized on the close reading of the text and particularly of poetry to discover how a work of literature functioned as a self-contained, self-referential, aesthetic object. This movement of new criticism derived its name from John Crow Ransom's book called The New Criticism. Should we say that J C Ransom happens to be the only person? We cannot ignore other influential person like T.S. Eliot, who came out with some of critical essays such as Tradition and Individual Talent, Hamlet and His Problems, in which Eliot developed his notion of the objective correlative. Eliot's evaluative judgment, such as his criticism of Milton and Shelley, and his liking for the so-called metaphysical poets, and his insistence that poetry must be impersonal, greatly influenced the formation of the new critical canon. Eliot says, poetry is not the turning loose of emotions. It is not an expression of personality, but an escape from personality. Means, under any circumstances, the writer's personality should not influence the text. At the same time, under any circumstances, a text should not present a writer's personality. Then how these critics concentrated on the concept of new criticism? New critics believed that the structure and meaning of the text were intimately connected and should not be analyzed separately. Means they want to say that how much structure is important. It is through structure that one can understand the real meaning of the text. In order to bring the focus of literary studies back to the analysis of the text, they aimed to exclude the reader's response. 1. The author's intention. 2nd. And thirdly, critical and cultural contexts and moralistic bias from their analysis. Means they were not interested in how the reader responded. They did not give importance to what was the intention of the writer in writing the text, nor they were interested in historical and cultural context, nor they wanted to find out what moral the writer wants to express. Question is, when was new criticism on the height of success? The heyday of the new criticism in American schools and colleges was the Cold War decades between 1950 and the mid-70s. Doubtless, because it offered relatively straightforward and politically uncontroversial approach to the teaching of literature. Critics like Brooks and Warren brought two books titled Understanding Poetry and Understanding Fiction, and both became staples during the era. Studying a passage of poetry or prose in new critical style required careful, exacting scrutiny of the passage itself, and stress was laid on the formal elements such as rhyme, meter, setting, characterization, and plot to identify the theme of the text. Means rather than giving importance to social context or the intention of the writer, importance was given to the text itself, identifying elements like rhyme, meter, setting, etc., etc. In addition to the theme, the new critics also looked for paradox, ambiguity, irony, and tension to help establish the single best and most unified interpretation of the text. Means they wanted to concentrate on unified interpretation of the text. And we all know that interpretation of text changes from person to person because the perception also differs. When we look into all these concepts and the importance given to the text as a whole, ignoring author, reader, and the social context, new critics have formed their own characteristics. 1. It opposed the interest of scholars, critics, and teachers in the biographies of author. Means life story of author was not important. The literary history and the social context of literature. Second, it is distinctly formalist in character. Means form became more important than any other aspect of text. Third, its method focused on a close reading of the text with rhyme, rhythm, meter, theme, imagery, metaphor, etc. Fourth, it says the author's intentions cannot be imagined by the reader or the critic unless and until the reader or the critic directly asks the author. Means we do not know under what imagination the writer has produced his text, and many times our imagination may go wrong. Fifth, new critics favored poetry over other literary forms, that is prose, drama, novel, short story, etc. because poetry was superior for them, and they consider poetry as purest exemplification of the literary values which they upheld. Another important feature is they borrowed the aesthetic qualities of poetry which were once discussed by S T Coleridge, the Romantic critic who became famous for his Biographia Literaria. His concepts of poetry as unified, organic whole that continues its internal conflicts and reaches some fine balance or harmony, and coming out as a wonderful text which propagates the principle of art for art's sake. To conclude, we can say that the new criticism is no longer a dominant theoretical model in American universities or universities in the world. Some of its methods, like close reading, are still fundamental tools of literary criticism, underpinning a number of subsequent theoretical approaches to literature. That is, new approaches have been identified by critics. For example, structuralism, post-structuralism, deconstruction, Orientalism, reader response theory, etc. etc. Means different critics have come out with different methodologies of approaching a text, but new criticism sticks to the principle of art for art's sake, and it never gave up its focus on the close reading of the text. That is, for new critics, text was ultimate.